My son called me from Dubai, crying with joy about his engagement, while I was literally counting quarters to buy groceries, not knowing I was the one who paid for his $25,000 proposal. I was sitting in my empty living room, staring at the sold sign through my window, when I got the Instagram notification that shattered my world. The notification chimed on my phone at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost didn't check it. At 72, I wasn't exactly what you'd call social media savvy. But my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had convinced me to get Instagram to keep up with my family. "It's how the young people share their lives now, Patty," she'd said. I wish I'd never listened. The post was from Brooke, my son Kyle's girlfriend. The first photo showed her hand stretched out against the backdrop of Dubai's glittering skyline. A diamond ring so massive it caught the desert sun like a disco ball. My heart stopped. Not because I was happy for them, but because I recognized that ring. I'd seen it before, 3 months ago, when Kyle was supposedly window shopping to cheer himself up after his divorce. I swiped to the next photo. Kyle down on one knee on what looked like the top of the world's tallest building, Brooke's hands covering her mouth in mock surprise. The caption read, "He said, yes to forever. Dubai, you've been magical. This man really knows how to make a girl feel like a princess. Thank you, baby, for the most incredible week of my life. Hey, beautiful soul. Before we dive in, show some love with a like, tap subscribe, and tell me, where in this big, beautiful world are you watching from? The most incredible week." My hands started shaking as I scrolled through image after image. First-class airplane seats with champagne flutes. A hotel suite that looked bigger than my current apartment. Designer shopping bags from every luxury store you could imagine. Meals that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And through it all, Kyle and Brooke, looking like they didn't have a care in the world. The same Kyle who just 3 months ago sat in my kitchen with tears in his eyes, telling me he was barely keeping his head above water after the divorce. The same Kyle who convinced me that selling my home of 40 years was the smart thing to do for both of us. The same Kyle who promised that the $50,000 I gave him would help him get back on his feet and start his consulting business. As I sat in that empty living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes I still hadn't unpacked, eating a dinner of canned soup and crackers, the bitter truth hit me like a physical blow. My son hadn't been struggling at all. He'd been planning the most extravagant proposal of his life, and I had been the one paying for it. The sold sign outside my window suddenly felt like a tombstone, marking the death of my trust in the person I loved most in this world. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this nightmare. 3 years ago, I lost my husband James to a sudden heart attack. We'd been married for 48 years, and losing him felt like losing half of myself. James and I had built our life in that big colonial house on Maple Street. It was where we brought our babies home from the hospital, where Kyle took his first steps in the living room, where Amanda learned to ride her bike in our long driveway. After James passed, that house felt enormous and eerily quiet. Every room held memories that both comforted and haunted me. I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee cups in the morning, or cooking dinner for 2 out of pure habit. My daughter Amanda lived clear across the country in Oregon with her husband and 2 kids. She called regularly and visited when she could, but her life was there, not here in Ohio. Then there was Kyle. My son had always been the one who stayed close to home, even after he married his ex-wife Linda. They only lived 20 minutes away. Kyle was my helper, my go-to person when something broke or when I needed someone to reach the high shelves. When his marriage started falling apart 2 years ago, I watched my strong, confident son crumble into someone I barely recognized. The divorce was brutal. Linda got the house, half his retirement, and he was paying her substantial alimony. Kyle lost weight, stopped taking care of himself, and moved back in with me temporarily while he figured out his next steps. I didn't mind. Having him in the house again made it feel alive, and I thought maybe we could help each other heal. That's when he started bringing Brooke around. She was young, bubbly, and seemed genuinely sweet. She'd compliment my cooking, help with dishes, and always remembered to ask about my doctor appointments. Brooke worked as some kind of social media influencer, which I didn't really understand, but she seemed to make Kyle happy again. For the first time in months, I saw my son smile. As the months went by, Kyle became my rock. He handled my insurance claims when the basement flooded. He drove me to medical appointments when my arthritis flared up. He even helped me figure out how to pay bills online when the bank started charging fees for paper statements. I trusted him completely, because he'd never given me a reason not to. That's what made his suggestion about selling the house seem so reasonable. Kyle sat me down one evening about 6 months ago and gently explained how expensive the house was becoming. The property taxes had gone up again. The roof needed replacing. The heating system was ancient and inefficient. "Mom," he said, taking my hands in his, "this place is eating up your savings. Dad would want you to be smart about your future." Kyle painted a picture of me living somewhere smaller, easier to maintain, with money in the bank for emergencies. He even found some lovely senior communities for us to tour together. And when he mentioned that he could use a little help getting back on his feet, it seemed like the perfect solution. We could help each other. I never suspected I was being played by a master manipulator. The Instagram discovery hit me like a physical blow, but what followed was even worse. As I stared at that massive diamond ring on Brooke's finger, my mind started doing the math I'd been too trusting to do before. I scrolled through Brooke's Instagram story, my heart sinking with each tap. There were videos of them boarding a first-class Emirates flight. Kyle casually sipping champagne, like he flew internationally, in luxury, every day. The airline tickets alone must have cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. Then came the hotel footage, a suite at the Burj Al Arab, which I later Googled and discovered costs over $2,000 per night. But it was the shopping spree videos that really twisted the knife. Brooke giggling as Kyle handed over his credit card at Cartier, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton. The same man who 3 months ago claimed he couldn't afford to fix his car's air conditioning was buying designer handbags without even looking at price tags. In one video, Brooke squealed with delight as Kyle surprised her with a $5,000 watch, just because. The proposal video had over 50,000 views. Kyle had hired a professional photographer and videographer to capture the moment on the Burj Khalifa's observation deck. The ring itself was easily $25,000, maybe more. The whole production looked like something a millionaire would do, not a man who supposedly needed his elderly mother's help to get back on his feet. I sat there in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by the life I'd packed into boxes when I sold my home. The apartment Kyle had helped me find was barely 600 square feet, a far cry from the spacious house where I'd raised my family. The rent was cheap, he'd assured me, which would help my money last longer. Now I realized it was cheap because it was a dump in a questionable neighborhood, and he'd wanted me somewhere small and out of the way while he spent my money. The timeline became crystal clear. Kyle had convinced me to sell the house in March. The closing was in April, and I'd given him that first $50,000 immediately. Then came the emergencies. His car needed major repairs, $8,000. He had unexpected tax bills, $12,000. His business needed startup capital, $15,000. Each time he'd come to me with such genuine distress, such appreciation for my help. "Mom, I promise I'll pay you back as soon as the business takes off," he'd say, kissing my forehead, like he did when he was little. Now, looking at the dates on these Dubai posts, I realized the truth. While I was eating ramen noodles and turning down my heat to save money, Kyle and Brooke had been living like royalty on my dime. The business was apparently the business of planning the most extravagant proposal imaginable. The comments on Brooke's posts made it even worse. Friends writing, "Goals," and "Your man really went all out," and "This is what real love looks like." One comment from what looked like Brooke's mother said, "So proud of Kyle for making our girls' dreams come true." I realized that everyone knew about this proposal except me. I was the only fool who believed Kyle was struggling. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in my narrow twin bed in this tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation I'd had with Kyle over the past 6 months. The manipulation had been so subtle, so perfectly crafted, that I'd never seen it coming. I got up around 2 a.m. and pulled out the old photo albums I'd managed to save when I downsized. There was Kyle at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, as he presented me with a Mother's Day card he'd made at school. Kyle at graduation, throwing his arms around me and whispering, "Thanks for everything, Mom." Kyle at his wedding, dancing with me and telling everyone I was the best mother a guy could ask for. When had that loving little boy turned into someone who could look me in the eye and lie so convincingly? I remembered the night he'd first suggested selling the house. We'd been sitting in my kitchen after dinner, the same kitchen where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with homework. His voice had been so gentle, so concerned. "Mom, I worry about you in this big place all alone. What if something happens and I can't get here fast enough? He'd made it sound like he was protecting me, not robbing me. Then there were Brooke's performances. God, she was good. Always complimenting my cooking, asking to take leftovers home because Kyle's mom makes the best casseroles. She'd even cried when I told her about James, holding my hand and saying how sorry she was that she'd never gotten to meet such a wonderful man, all while knowing she was helping to steal the money James and I had saved for 48 years. The worst part was remembering how grateful I'd felt. When Kyle struggled with grocery money, I'd felt useful again, needed. When he asked for help with his business expenses, I'd been proud to support my son's fresh start. Every time I handed over another check, I told myself I was investing in his future, in our family's future. I thought about my neighbors back on Maple Street. Mrs. Henderson next door had seemed so surprised when I told her I was selling. "But Patty," she'd said, "that house is your whole life." I'd smiled and repeated Kyle's words about downsizing being smart, about wanting something more manageable. Now I wondered if she'd seen right through it, sitting in that dark apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd been convinced to abandon. I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my 72 years. Not just betrayed, but humiliated. I was the foolish old woman who'd been taken advantage of by her own child. But somewhere, in that humiliation, a tiny spark of anger was beginning to grow. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got angry instead of sad. Real, burning anger that felt better than the crushing grief I'd been carrying. And angry people, I discovered, make much better investigators than heartbroken ones. I pulled out every financial document I could find and spread them across my tiny kitchen table like a detective working a case. The first thing I discovered made my hands shake with relief. The limited power of attorney I'd given Kyle had been specifically for the house sale only, and it had automatically expired 30 days after closing. He'd been very careful about that, making it sound temporary and reasonable. "Just to handle the paperwork, Mom. You know how complicated these real estate transactions can be." But here's what Kyle didn't know about his old mother. I'd been keeping meticulous financial records since before he was born. James used to tease me about my obsessive filing system. But now it was going to save me. I found copies of every check I'd written, every bank transfer, every emergency Kyle had claimed. The joint account was the smoking gun. Kyle had convinced me to open it 3 months ago for easier access to help each other out. He'd made it sound so practical, so modern. "This way, if you need something and I'm at work, I can just transfer money directly, Mom. No more waiting for checks to clear." What I discovered was that while the account was joint, the original $430,000 from my house sale was still legally mine. Kyle had access, but I hadn't actually signed over ownership. Then I started digging deeper, and that's when I hit gold. I found Kyle's laptop that he'd left behind when he moved out. He'd never changed his passwords, still using Patriots 2019 for everything, just like always. His email was a treasure trove of evidence I never expected to find. There were emails between Kyle and Brooke going back 6 months, long before he'd ever mentioned being in crisis to me. "Can't wait for Dubai, baby," Brooke had written. "This is going to be the most amazing proposal ever. Your mom is going to be so happy for us when she finds out how we used her investment in our future." My investment in their future. That's how they'd been talking about my money. Even worse were the emails to travel agents and jewelry stores. Kyle had been planning this Dubai proposal since January, a full 2 months before he'd come to me, crying about his financial struggles. The ring alone had cost $28,000. The hotel suite was $3,500 per night for a week. The flights were $15,000 for both of them, first-class round trip. But the most damning evidence was an email Kyle had sent to Brooke's parents, introducing himself and explaining the situation. "Patricia is so excited about downsizing and starting this new chapter of her life," he'd written. "She's been incredibly generous in helping us get started, and she couldn't be happier about contributing to our engagement. She keeps saying how proud she is that her money is going towards something so meaningful." I printed everything, every email, every receipt, every bank statement. Kyle had been sloppy, overconfident, and that was going to be his downfall. I spent the next 3 days planning my strategy like a general preparing for war. But first, I needed professional advice. I called my lawyer, Richard Brennan, who'd handled James's estate and our wills for over 20 years. Richard had always been straight with me, never talked down to me like some lawyers do to older women. Patricia, Richard said after I'd explained the situation, I'm going to be very direct with you. What Kyle did was morally reprehensible, but legally, you're in a strong position. That joint account structure was actually smart on your part, even if you didn't realize it at the time. The money is still legally yours. Richard explained that I could immediately revoke Kyle's access to the account and transfer everything to a new account in my name only. Do it today, he advised. Don't wait, don't warn him, just do it. The longer that money sits accessible to him, the more risk you're taking. Next, I called my financial advisor, Helen Martinez, who'd been managing my retirement accounts since James passed. Helen was furious when I explained what had happened. Patricia, this is financial elder abuse. Plain and simple, we need to protect your assets immediately and document everything for potential legal action. Together, we developed a plan. Helen would help me move all my money to new accounts at a different bank, accounts Kyle had never had access to. She'd also help me restructure my finances to ensure this could never happen again. From now on, Helen said, no one gets access to your money except you. I don't care if it's your son, your daughter, or the Pope himself. But I wasn't just going to hide and protect myself. I was going to confront Kyle with the evidence and watch him squirm. However, I needed to be smart about it. If I tipped him off too early, he might try to withdraw more money or come up with some elaborate excuse. So I did something that felt deliciously sneaky. I started liking Brooke's Instagram posts. Not all of them, just enough to seem like a supportive future mother-in-law who was thrilled about the engagement. I even left a comment on one photo. So happy for you both. Can't wait to hear all about it. It nearly killed me to type those words, but I needed them to think I was still their mark. I also started casually texting Kyle, asking innocent questions about his business and how things were going. He responded with the same lies he'd been telling for months, talking about slow growth and building a client base. Each text was more evidence of his deception. Meanwhile, I was methodically documenting everything. I printed bank statements, saved screenshots of every social media post, and organized all the emails I'd found. I created a timeline showing exactly when Kyle had asked for money versus when he'd actually booked the Dubai trip. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. The hardest part was acting normal when Kyle called to check on me. Hearing his voice, so caring and concerned, when I now knew exactly what kind of person he really was, made my skin crawl. But I played along, even thanking him for looking out for me, while I quietly moved my money out of his reach. By the end of that week, I was ready for war. Kyle called me on a Thursday evening, his voice bubbling with excitement. Mom, I have the most incredible news. Brooke and I got engaged. I proposed in Dubai, and it was absolutely perfect. She said yes. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Oh, Kyle, that's wonderful. Congratulations, honey. I'm so happy for you both. The words tasted like poison, but I delivered them with all the maternal warmth I could muster. Thanks, Mom. I can't wait for you to see the ring. It's exactly what she always dreamed of. And Dubai was magical. Just incredible. I wish you could have seen it. I'll bet you do, I thought grimly. Well, this definitely calls for a celebration. Why don't you both come over for dinner Sunday? I'll make your favorite pot roast, and we can celebrate properly. That sounds perfect, Mom. Brooke can't wait to show you everything and tell you all about the proposal. I'm sure she can't. Sunday afternoon, I set my tiny dining table with my best china, the pieces I'd managed to save when I downsized. I'd spent the morning cooking Kyle's favorite meal, the same pot roast I'd made for his birthday every year since he was 5. If this was going to be our last family dinner, at least the food would be good. They arrived right on time, Brooke practically glowing as she thrust her hand toward me. Mrs. Sullivan, look, isn't it the most beautiful ring you've ever seen? I took her hand gently, admiring the massive diamond that had cost more than most people's cars. It's absolutely stunning, dear. Kyle certainly has good taste. He really does, she gushed. The whole trip was like a fairy tale. Dubai is just incredible. And Kyle planned every single detail perfectly. I felt like a princess. We sat down to dinner, and for 30 minutes, I listened to them gush about their luxury vacation, the helicopter rides, the private shopping experiences, the 5-star restaurants. Kyle talked about it all like he was a man who'd worked hard and deserved such luxuries, not someone who'd stolen from his elderly mother to fund his fantasy. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I excused myself and returned with a manila folder thick with documents. I set it on the table between the dinner plates and pot roast. Kyle, I said calmly, we need to talk. I opened the folder and began laying out printed screenshots of their Instagram posts, bank statements, and email printouts. The color drained from Kyle's face as he realized what he was looking at. I know exactly how much you spent, exactly when you spent it, and exactly how you lied to get it. The silence at my dinner table was deafening. Kyle stared at the documents spread before him like he was looking at his own death warrant. Brooke's fork clattered against her plate as her hand flew to her mouth. Mom, I can explain, Kyle started, but his voice cracked on the word, explain. Please do, I said, folding my hands calmly in my lap. I'd love to hear how you explain booking a $28,000 engagement ring in January while telling me in March that you couldn't afford groceries. Kyle's eyes darted frantically across the papers. I watched him realize that I had everything. His emails, their text conversations, receipts from every luxury purchase. There was no way to spin this. No sob story that could cover the evidence. The proposal was. It was an investment in our future, he stammered. I knew if I could just get my life together, find the right woman, I could pay you back with interest. Brooke makes me a better person, Mom. She motivates me to succeed. I pulled out the email he'd sent to Brooke's parents. Is that why you told her family that I was excited about contributing to your engagement and couldn't be happier about giving you my money? Brooke's face went pale. Kyle, you told me she knew about the ring. You said she was happy to help with the proposal because she loved me so much. I was going to tell her afterward, Kyle said, desperately. I wanted it to be a surprise for everyone. A surprise. My voice rose, for the first time that evening. Kyle, I've been eating canned soup for dinner while you were drinking $300 bottles of wine in Dubai. I've been wearing the same 3 outfits for months because I thought I needed to save money while you spent $5,000 on a watch for your girlfriend. Just because. What exactly was the surprise supposed to be? Kyle tried a different approach, his voice taking on the manipulative tone I now recognized so clearly. Mom, you're taking this all wrong. This wasn't about the money. This was about family, about bringing Brooke into our family properly. She's going to be your daughter-in-law. Don't you want her to feel loved and welcomed? Don't. My voice was ice cold. Don't you dare try to make this about love or family. You stole from me, Kyle. You looked me in the eye, lied to my face, and stole the money your father and I worked 48 years to save. Brooke started crying. Mrs. Sullivan, I swear I didn't know. Kyle told me you had given him money for our future, but I never knew. I never thought. I pulled out her text messages, thanking me for my generous wedding gift. Really, Brooke? Because you seemed pretty aware in your text to Kyle about how grateful you were for my generosity. Kyle's desperation turned to anger, just like I'd expected. Fine. You want to be petty about this? You want to ruin my happiness over money? You're my mother. You should want to help me succeed, not sabotage my relationship. And you should want to protect your mother, not rob her blind, I replied, evenly. But here we are. That's when Kyle made his biggest mistake. He threatened me. Kyle's threat turned out to be the best thing he could have done for me. I'll take you to court, Mom. I'll claim you're mentally incompetent and get guardianship over your finances. You're 72 years old, living alone, making bad decisions. No judge will side with you over me. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Brooke gasped and stared at Kyle like she was seeing him for the first time. Even she seemed shocked by how low he was willing to go. I smiled. Actually, smiled. Go ahead, Kyle. Please do take me to court. I'd love for a judge to see all this evidence of how you systematically defrauded your elderly mother. Richard Brennan is looking forward to that conversation, too. Kyle's face went ashen when I mentioned my lawyer's name. He knew Richard had handled our family's legal affairs for decades and wasn't some pushover attorney. The rest of the evening dissolved into Kyle, alternating between desperate apologies and angry accusations. Brooke quietly slipped off her engagement ring and placed it on the table. I can't do this, Kyle. I can't build a life on something this horrible. She left that night and, according to social media, broke up with him the next day. That was 8 months ago. Kyle tried reaching out a few times with half-hearted apologies, always followed by hints about his financial struggles. I ignored them all. My daughter Amanda flew out from Oregon when I told her what happened, and she was furious she hadn't seen the signs. Mom, you should have called me. I would have stopped this somehow. But here's the thing. I didn't need saving. I needed awakening. And Kyle's betrayal gave me that. I used my reclaimed money to buy a beautiful cottage in Sunset Gardens, a retirement community 20 minutes from Amanda's house in Oregon. Yes, I moved across the country at 72, and it was the best decision I ever made. My little house has a garden where I grow the same flowers James and I used to tend together. I've joined a book club, started volunteering at the local elementary school, and made friends who value authenticity over family obligation. Last month, Kyle called to wish me happy birthday. His voice sounded tired, defeated. He's apparently struggling to find another relationship after word got around about what he'd done. He asked if we could work things out and mentioned that he'd learned his lesson. I told him I was glad he'd learned something, but that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. I've set aside money for my grandchildren's education, money that will go directly to them when they're old enough, not through their parents. Amanda checks on me regularly, but she understands that I'm finally living for myself, not as someone's caretaker or victim. People ask if I miss Kyle, if I regret cutting him out of my life. The truth is, I don't miss the person he became. I mourn the son I thought I had, but I refuse to pretend the man who stole from me deserves access to my heart or my wallet. I'm 72 years old, and for the first time in years, I'm truly free.